Hey team, Peps here. Good to see you again. Today we're going to be talking about drop-ins. Drop-ins are basically unannounced visits by either peers or senior leaders within a school. And it's my contention that drop-ins are an underutilized, understood, if that's a thing, aspect of teacher and school improvement. And so we're going to be trying to build the case for that. So, teacher expertise, what do we know? Well, firstly, it makes a big difference, right? Teacher expertise is super important. The most expert teachers, those in the kind of top quartile of the effectiveness distribution, help their students to get better somewhere between 2 to 4 times the rate of the least expert teachers. So that's like a really significant amount. Effective teaching is pretty much the biggest lever we have for improving the learning and life chances of the young people in our care. And as such, something we should all be investing heavily in, which I believe we probably are, okay, if you're watching this video at least. However, on the other kind of side of the coin, it is not always that easy to keep getting better just through classroom experience alone as a teacher throughout your whole career. So this is a teacher growth curve. I think this one was done by Pape and Kraft about 10 years ago or so. What they found was that on average, teachers tend to get better quite quickly during the first 3 years of their career. This is year 0 to year 3 here. But after that, the kind of improvement rate slows down quite a bit. Between year 3 and year 10, Pape and Kraft estimate that the average teacher, now bear in mind that some teachers will get better and some teachers will actually get worse, but for the average teacher, they will improve by a rate of 0.02 standard deviations. Now, what does that mean? Well, if we use the EEF's kind of toolkit that allows us to translate things like standard deviations to additional months worth of teaching in a school year, it's all very crude, but it's the kind of best comparison we've got. What that tells us is that basically between years 3 and years 10, just based on classroom experience alone, the average teacher tends to get better by around about 1 day a year. In short, teacher effectiveness is pretty important, but it's hard to keep getting better as a teacher just through classroom experience alone. School conditions can make a big difference, and professional development can obviously have a big difference as well. Instructional coaching is kind of one of the few things that seems to help teachers to get better in a kind of reliable way, in a way that scales. But don't just take it from me, let's hear from Professor Sam Sims, who is an educational researcher at Institute of Education in London and also the head of research at Ambition Institute. Here with Sam Sims at Research Ed 2025 National Conference, very exciting.
It's 2024 perhaps.
It's 2024.
Yeah.
Next year will be 2025.
Be here too.
Yeah. Okay. Like, how effective is instructional coaching? What is it? Does the evidence kind of give us a sense of just how powerful it can be?
Yeah, so it shows us that instructional coaching compared to sort of business as usual, not getting any professional development, improves practice as measured by classroom observation rubrics, what teachers are actually doing. Yeah. And the evidence shows us that it improves pupil outcomes as well, presumably through the improved teaching. Yeah. And we also know that the same professional development, the same content, whatever you're focusing on, could be formative assessment, that same PD will be more effective if delivered through instructional coaching than a few other different types of kind of more traditional formats for professional development.
Okay. For example, we have a study by Cilliers in 2017, which looked at, which kind of did a horse race between instructional coaching and more traditional forms of professional development, basically like a, off-site one-hit training, a bit like the inset days that we have in schools in the UK. And what they found was that although both forms of training did have a positive impact, instructional coaching had a significantly bigger impact. I think it ended up being somewhere around about 0.2 standard deviations, which again, using the EEF toolkit, is roughly equivalent to something like 2 to 3 months worth of additional progress by your students in a school year. So what that means is that before you had the instructional coaching, if you were able to teach 9 months worth of content, then the year after you'd be able to squeeze in like 12 months worth of content into the same 9 months, if that makes sense. So all in all, if we think back to the kind of typical improvement that teachers make by classroom experience alone, which roughly is 1 day a year, and we compare that to the effect size of instructional coaching, which is kind of like 2 to 3 months in a typical year, we're looking at like a multiple of 40 in terms of like how much better instructional coaching is than just classroom experience alone. So it's a pretty big deal. Now, the effectiveness of instructional coaching is often attributed to the kind of mechanisms within instructional coaching. you did this incredible study, systematic review and meta-analysis of the active ingredients of professional development. It's kind of like we're all grateful for. How does that kind of like in your head marry up with instructional coaching?
Yeah. So I think what it tells us is the thing that has emerged very, very clearly from it is just the critical importance and value of modelling.
Okay.
Modelling evidence-based practice. A picture's worth 1,000 words, and a model is like some version of a picture, right?
Okay,
it's like
seeing
is right. 1,000 squared. Yeah. And so, I think instructional coaching should pretty much always have modelling in my view. We've got evidence from a systematic review saying that PD that includes modelling tends to be more effective, like an association. And then we've also done at Ambition Institute, my team's done a simulator study where we've given people the same PD, but randomized, was there a model included or not? And the modeling group just did like way better.
Okay.
And so, this is one way in which coaches have to be skilled. They've got to be able to like model in the moment the right thing, or you've got to have some sort of video library, which is what they do in My Teaching Partner. But yeah, model.
Okay, model. Sweet. All right. Thank you, Sam. And there was also a study by Zid Mansanido and colleagues that looked at the power of rehearsal and found that, again, rehearsal can have a much bigger impact than kind of more traditional forms of professional development, such as kind of like discussion and reflection. So all of these mechanisms definitely have a big impact. But for me, there's increasing evidence to suggest that drop-ins, these unannounced observations by peers or senior leaders, may also be a big part of the effect mechanic of instructional coaching and, as a result, the effect mechanic of school improvement more generally. We recently had this working paper from FIPS, which shows like really big effects actually on not only student learning measured by test scores, but also student behaviour measured by suspensions. Now it's probably best if we at this point pause and hear from someone who has much more experience than me of actually implementing drop-ins. Hi, I'm here with Richard Ball, who is coaching development lead at Step Lab and author of many books, too many to remember. I know that there's some evidence to suggest that things like drop-ins can be really powerful. Can you, do schools do that? Is that helpful? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So I think in lots of schools, the culture can be something that really needs to be worked on. So I think there's a history of lesson observations being very much about a judgment of your teaching and all about kind of what you need to do next to improve. But there's a kind of a preset thing that senior leaders are looking for as they come into a lesson. And I think one of the things that needs to happen is that drop-ins are about disassociating that kind of lesson observation and making sure that your lesson drop-ins are actually low stakes. Performance management is about the judgment that I mentioned, and lesson drop-ins instead are about, well, let's reinforce what's really good here, and then let's think about a next step for the teacher to work on. But I think sometimes the old style observations was very much a list of things that you had to work on, and at the end the teacher would say to you, well, is this good? Was it a good lesson?
Right.
And I think drop-ins are about moving away from that kind of culture.
And so what is talk to me about schools that are doing this really well. What does it look like? Who does them? How long do they last? What happens afterwards?
Okay. So I think at my school, when we introduced drop-ins, we just said anyone could go and drop in on anyone else's lesson. And that was a huge shift from the idea that lesson observations were done by a leader to you. And the idea was we just want to see what great practice is out there. Let's reinforce what's really working well. And I think the schools where they need to shift the culture most, starting with a positive drop-in, can be really, really helpful. So anyone can go and see anyone, but we recommend that it's just positive feedback. It's just the reinforcement of the good practice. And another really good thing about drop-ins is if you make it very, very precise and specific. So you're not going in and saying, here's 10 things you did really well. That's too cognitively overloading for the teacher. Whereas if I was to come in and say, just in a quick 5-minute lesson visit, and to say, Peps, I can see that you are working really hard around your call for silence. You stood at the front of the class, your posture was really strong, and that meant that the impact on students was this. Students were very quickly called to attention, and you were ready to then go into your explanation. So I've told you what you did well, and what the impact that it had on students, rather than, you've got a great relationship with your students. I mean, what does that mean? If it wasn't good, how would I make it better? I think there's so much to unpack there. So really precise, really specific, that anyone can do them of anyone. and that they can just be that kind of 2 minute, 5 minute, 7 minute drop in. That it doesn't need to be a leader sitting in the back of the classroom for 30 minutes to make some kind of judgment.
What happens in a school whenever like drop-ins have been happening regularly? What changes? Like, what's the vibe that changes?
I think there's a couple of things. I think first of all, you get teachers actually talking about teaching, where certainly that wasn't my experience previously. You know, oh, I got a shout out for this. What was it about? You know, what was mentioned as something that you were doing well? Oh, you know, and that corridor interaction between teachers was something I hadn't really seen before. You also get the culture, like I said, about motivation, because people are in and out of each other's lessons all the time. So it really spreads that positive culture. Lesson visits are no longer something to be feared. It's kind of, you know, you're really building that positive culture. But the other side of it is that for leaders, it's really powerful because you start to see patterns. So you start to see, oh, actually, across the school, this is consistently going really, really well. And who are the people that are doing it so well that they could then model it to other teachers, for example? So you start to see patterns, and then you start to think, well, over time, maybe we need to add a little bit of development in here. So we might add you know, perhaps this part of your lesson was really spot on. Could you try this? Or have you thought about this? And add that next step.
And that creates the groundwork for like instructional coaching, essentially.
Exactly, yeah. And also it allows you to see maybe what areas of pedagogy you do need to work on whole school as well.
Anyway, thank you very much, Rachel. That's super helpful.
Thank you.
So all in all, like drop-ins have the potential to be a kind of big lever for improving not only teaching, but culture across a school. They are best whenever they are positive, they are granular, just focusing on kind of one small thing. And when they tie some teacher action, you know, this is what you did, to some student impact. As a result, this is what a student learned. And then finally, we can kind of supercharge the impact of drop-ins by having public shout-outs, where as a school, you are publicly calling out good things that some teachers saw in other teachers' lessons. And this kind of creates this impetus for everyone to improve, and again, further reduces the kind of like negative stakes that can be associated with things like drop-ins and peer observations. There you go. Hope that's been a useful video, and I'll see you next time.